Welcome to the PsyD webinar. I'm Bradley Cipher, the PsyD admissions advisor here at Divine Mercy University. And today I'm delighted to be joined by second year doctoral student, Chris Kraft. The format for today's webinar, as usual, is I'll begin by interviewing Chris and then before launching into a slideshow about the nature of the school and its major elements of the doctoral program. And then I'll finish with some Q&A. So we will hold the Q&A session to the end. So as we move through the conversation, please lodge your questions in the chat box. Also in the chat box, you will see my Calendly link, my email address. So I love hearing from students, giving them more information about our doctoral program and showing how I can be of service is important there. So please get in touch with me through my Calendly or through email. Okay, welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Bradley. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, good to have you. So how did you become interested in clinical psychology just in the first place in the most general sense?
Yeah, so let's see. I was thinking about this question and where to go back to, where to start. I'll start with my undergraduate years. I went to the University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota, and I went there, I think, with sort of a hodgepodge idea of things I could do. So I was pre-accepted to the physical therapy program. I was working towards, I was thinking maybe healthcare administration. I had biology pre-med. So I had a few different, let's just say, fires going.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I was thinking maybe I could become a doctor and then run a hospital. And I think the whole idea behind what I was thinking was I just wanted to help people. I just wanted to help as many people as I could.
Right.
Now, when I was there, I also played football, and my now wife was going there as well. And I think her going there was probably the biggest reason that brought me to the University of Mary.
Nice,
but
nice.
but also a big part of it was just an opportunity to grow in my faith. So there was a lot of different things that brought me to the University of Mary. And while I was studying there, and notice I haven't said psychology yet. While I was studying there, um, I took a theology course that I think is required of all students there. And the theology course rocked my world. It really was sort of a one big movement just interiorly for me to be transformed on a spiritual front, which I think awakened my eyes a bit to what trajectory am I on? And so as I began to ask that question, I realized, the healthcare administration, the biology pre-med, the PT, it wasn't a fit for me that seemed right. And so I started to look at my gifts and even just my natural conversations that I was having with people. And I thought, it'd be really neat to do something with my life that integrated sort of this natural role that I've seen myself in with relationships with people, which was more of a counselor, sort of just support, someone who was being present and listening, with the theology aspect that I was also falling in love with. And so I switched my degree to psychology and theology. And during that time as well, I met a fellow by the name of Dr. James Link back in the Bismarck Diocese, who had done just a lot of wonderful work for the diocese using psychology and theology, really integrating the two at the service of the church. And I just found that really attractive. So I switched my major, as I said, and I knew I would need to do studies beyond undergraduate after that. So I began to look and say, well, where could I continue this mission of theology, psychology, at the service of the church? And DMU just came to the fore as one of the best places that I could find where I could continue that. So I think I maybe jumped ahead a little bit there, but that's sort of the underpinnings for me that brought me to psychology and the Divine Mercy University.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. What was this theology class exactly?
It was called Search for God,
Ah,
which is an important search that we're all on.
yeah.
Uh, I think in that I heard an invitation to follow him more authentically with my life. Also at the University of Mary was focus on campus. And so Focus had this really, I think, just beautiful view on what relationships are for, and this sort of authentic person to person interaction. And I just found a lot of life from that sort of way of relating to people. That's been interesting. Now, fast forward to looking at, okay, as a psychologist and as a clinician, these relationships are different than friendships. Yeah, these relationships are different, but there's still that sense of being totally present, of being person to person. Um, that this has been really, I would say, a joy of getting to know more and more.
Wow, that's such a great story. I love that. I mean, especially, as one that's studied a lot of theology myself. I mean, that's such a wonderful. It's almost like it seems like, um, because I think a lot of maybe one of the biggest misconceptions, right, or maybe historically the tension between theology and psychology. I mean, that story just kind of illustrates that they go together, right? That one, the truth about God and the human person, ought to lead us to our own vocations, and certainly, indeed, in your own case, a vocation to heal, to heal others, emotionally, and in wherever, whatever dire straits they often find themselves. That's really beautiful.
It
Um,
was, I was just going to add, it was hard for me to imagine how could I do counseling or how could I do psychology without theology,
yeah,
without the philosophy of the person's integrated and as a sort of foundation and just sort of interwoven throughout. I couldn't really imagine how would you do that in a way that would be authentic. Now I've started to see that there's really good and important work that people are doing, outside of a religious perspective or outside of an underpinning of who the human person is from a theological perspective. But for me, it was like, but how do you do it to the fullest degree of what's most helpful for people unless you have that understanding of the person that's really rooted in the truth of who people are?
yeah, yeah. It seems like there would be something crucially missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I interrupted you. I don't know if you're going to ask another question.
No, no. You actually, in some ways, you already anticipated my next question, which is about, why you went ahead with Divine Mercy. Can you say a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So, um, yeah, I think what I was looking at was, okay, what's close to home, what's not too close to home. Uh, Being married, and now my wife and I have an 18-month-old, raising a family, uh, and so I'm like, well, what's practical, what's doable,
Yeah,
how are we going to make this work? And uh, I think on the first thought of realizing that Divine Mercy University was like, it seemed like the place to go to,
yeah,
of like, if I want to do, if I want to learn about psychology and I want to practice from a integrated theology and I don't want to unlearn things or add it on super extra, but for it all to be integrated, it
yeah,
seemed like just clear that DMU was the place to go. And we were not excited that it was 1,500 miles away from Bismarck, North Dakota.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but it's along the way it's been, I think, something that the Lord has just opened doors to us to take steps into, and as we take steps further he opens the doors and invites us further, um and it's definitely challenging to be away from family, that's for sure. I have to give a shout out to my mom. I think my mom Jean is watching right now. And it's challenging to be far away from family, but it's all understood within the mission of, uh, what does it mean for me to be a married man, and for me to be a father of a beautiful little girl, and what does it mean for me to participate in the mission that the Lord has set out for me, and all those things pointed me towards, DMU. Um, and so yeah, it's been a leap. It's been challenging. It's been, yeah, challenging is almost an understatement. I mean, it's been formative,
mhm,
towards, both vocationally and as well as vocationally, with my family at home and career wise forward. But it seemed to be a good fit, and now it's been a journey to see how that is being playing out in my life.
Yeah. I remember when you came here and people were joking around like who's the person that came furthest away, and it was Chris, by far. Like it wasn't even close. um,
Actually, we have an Australian Dominican priest in our cohort, so he's
oh, right on, right on. I mean, from amongst the Americans, you were
yes,
by far like within the continent. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, right. Thank you for that correction. Yeah, that's fair. In fact, it's funny, Australians, we just had another Australian join us this year, the 23 start, Sarah. At any rate, so tell me more about your own clinical and academic interests within psychology. I mean, where do you see yourself when you finish here and when you go off and you have an internship? What does that look like to you?
yeah. I think a major prerogative of mine is how can I take all that I'm learning here at Divine Mercy University, the foundation of psychology integrated with Catholicism and philosophy. How can I take this and use it at the service of the church? So that's a major interest of mine. I would say that where I see myself after graduating here is going back to my home state of North Dakota and working with the Diocese of Bismarck, and also in the Diocese of Bismarck's University of Mary, and being put to work for the service of the church. So in some regards, what that has looked like includes things like evaluations, assessments for seminarians and those who are interested in the religious life, applicants. It looks like assessing those who are interested in becoming part of the diaconate community, various teaching opportunities potentially in and throughout the diocese. And then another big part of it as well is just strengthening marriages. So
Hmm.
that's actually a piece of what my dissertation is going to be. Thankfully, we've just kind of, I think, moving towards finalizing my plan for the dissertation.
Hmm.
I still work in progress, but where I'll be looking at a pre-marriage program in town. And when I say in town, I mean here in DC, and they're going through the process of revamping the program. And so my dissertation is going to help take a snapshot of how effective is this program and how can we improve it for the sake of couples as they get ready to launch into marriage. So those would be some, I guess, some general interests of mine. And the assessment piece, which already in our program, second year here, we're starting to look at different assessment measures, personality assessment measures, how to utilize those, where they come from, how to interpret them, which will definitely be something I'll be doing. And then as well as the family and marriage piece as well. So we've gotten some pieces of that from like the child perspective, child-centered play therapy, uh, also some work with group filial therapy or just filial therapy in general, working with parents and their children. Um, and then I think also I think I just have an interest as well working with people and being present to them, as I kind of spoke about earlier. Um, So that's kind of a splattering a bit there, but I think the big interest just for mine is saying, okay, what can I do to take this and then serve the church with it? And so that kind of captures it to some degree.
Yeah, it's beautifully said. I love this. Especially the your dissertation idea is fascinating to me because I like how practical it is, right? It sounds like one of these things that I could have like very immediate and proximate application. I mean, to kind of like reevaluate what is sort of currently the sort of typical schematic for preparing people for marriage, and how can that be improved, how can that be reevaluated, etc. And then also like this, it sounds though that the personality, the seminarian evaluations, that they all kind of in a way are related to each other because they kind of is speaking to different elements of the human person. What are some of your favorite personality tests?
Personality tests.
Mhm.
Um, well, I'll speak a little bit about the MMPI. So we've walked through the MMPI 2, and then the 3 is now out. So we'll be walking through that, I think, hopefully at an externship in the future. But I think one thing I found about it is super interesting how much you can learn about a person from a test of that nature. I know I can't say too much about it for the sake of what's the word, protecting sort of the integrity of the test. But I've been kind of just amazed by how much research is behind the test, and then all that you can glean about the person from the test. Now, of course, you can't take one single test and say this person has a certain disorder, or this person is has this sort of cluster of things going on for them. You have to use other pieces of data and evidence as well. But I think I've been really fascinated by the MMPI to see how it's how much you can learn about someone using it. It'll be really interesting in the spring to also learn about the Rorschach and sort of compare and contrast the differences of the tests and how they're utilized. That's a bit of a snapshot there about some of the tests I enjoy. There's it's amazing how much there is to learn about these tests too. We spend like we've spent a number of weeks just talking about one test, the MMPI, trying to learn it and interpret it
Yeah.
and write an assessment about it. But to me, it helps. To me, it helps think of it in light of the understanding of the human person, how each person's a gift and each person is made in the dignity of, made with dignity and in the image of God. That you would take so much time, even just with one measure, to help understand what's going on for a person. That like you would really slow things down to really figure out what's the actual experience of the person. To me, I think it's reflective of the mission of seeing each person with dignity, that you would take that sort of time to really evaluate what's going on and then compare it to other things that you have access to yourself as well.
Yeah. So is the MMPI, does that include the like the openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism schematic, or is that something different?
That's something different.
Okay.
That's that was ocean.
That's what?
Well, the acronym there is ocean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I
Yeah,
mean, but it sounds like they're different tests then.
yeah. But we haven't gone over much what you've just shared with the personality measures of the ocean. But I think what you're referring to is more of a theory of how personalities cluster together.
Hmm.
Um, the MMPI has some clinical scales that are part of it as well. So it also so you get uh, both a personality piece in there, but also a diagnostic picture of the person as well.
Okay.
So that if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's super helpful and interesting. Okay, now what would you say, I mean, given your time here so far, would be maybe some of the most enjoyable and rewarding parts of the DMU, and maybe by contrast, what would be some of the most challenging elements of the program so far?
Okay, let's see. Which one should I start with?
Either,
Is this
either one.
projective? Is this
What?
projective? To see which one I start with is projective? No. Um, say some of the most enjoyable things have been things like just getting to know the people that are here and being edified by the sort of people that are here. I mean, there's just some really wonderful people that are trying to, both be excellent clinicians, excellent in the psychology world, and also excellent just as human people in practicing their faith. And I think being around people like that is just it's an aspiring thing to be a part of, and it's really a joyful thing to be a part of. So, and that goes for both professors and also other students that are here as well. So I think getting to know other people has been really a gift. I'd say along the challenging things for me has had to do with balancing, prioritizing, and just making it work, family life and academic rigor. It's an intense program. There's lots of reading, there's lots to learn. Clinical work's ramping up. There's lots of things to write for dissertations and things like that. Um, and I think um, that coupled with got a little one at home, needs her diaper changed. She needs her dad time.
Yeah.
and my wife's working full time as a physical therapist here in town as well.
Mhm.
So I think just balancing, okay, how do I be happy with just being the best that I can be in this moment of being the good enough dad, the good enough husband, the good enough student here at DMU. Just there's limited time, there's limited resources. How do I balance it all and just make it work? So I think that's been probably one of the most challenging pieces is okay, how do how do I do this? Thankfully, there's others in my cohort and others who've gone before me that have done it as well. Um, and I think each of us is kind of on our own paths as well. So you kind of figure out like what works for your family. Um, and so yeah, that's been probably more challenging piece, but it really helps for me just knowing that this is where the Lord's called me. So if this is where the Lord's called me, then He's gonna make the path clear, and those things that are challenging are going to be important pieces of my own formation. And so just keeping that in the forefront of my mind as things are challenging or I feel overwhelmed and stressed with various things, um, of just recognizing who's called me here and who's sustaining me in this time.
Yeah. It sounds like this is a theme that you're coming back to again and again, this business of vocation, right? And I it's would you say, it sounds like you have a lot of peace with this, right? And like despite the challenges of the program and being married and having a very young child and the demands, the rigors of this program, it sounds though that, in spite of all of that, you have a deep sense of like contentment that this is something that God has brought you to, and he'll sort of see you through to the end. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, that's fair.
Good.
And it helps to know that and I guess to just trust. And this is his plan for me, and this is being unfolded as we go, and um, that the Lord is bringing us to where He wants us to be, and having to trust in that is huge. And then also just enjoying the process along the way. I mean, Northern Virginia is actually a really beautiful place to live. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
the trees are, I mean, you can't really see a sunset around here, but the trees are beautiful. The fall is like elongated. You have some leaves that have already changed and lost, and some that are already still green. I mean, I'm not really used to that. Um, I'm
Yeah.
also used to snow hitting the ground here soon and staying until, I don't know, April.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, enjoying the process along the way as well, even as things kind of are challenging here and there, and just, recognizing the gift that we have in front of us and just cherishing it.
Yeah. Well said. Beautiful. Okay. Um, so reasons for wanting to pursue a doctorate in psychology are varied. But what might you say would be some, maybe on the one hand, some very good reasons to pursue doctoral studies, and maybe some not so good reasons, or maybe even some problematic reasons for motivations for wanting to pursue the PsyD?
That's a good question. Um, I'll start with one with the maybe not so good reason, and I think this one's particularly relevant to those who maybe want to serve the church with their work. Um, we're not you're not trying to become a psychologist to become rich.
Yeah.
That's one thing just to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Um, Beautiful reasons I think include, uh, you know, if you have identified within yourself a vocation to heal, to sit with people, to be present with people, and you see this as an active step in carrying out that vocation. So bringing it back to the vocation piece. Now there's a lot of factors that come into that. Other reasons for myself, I was really interested in sort of the latitude as a psychologist that I knew I would have. So the need for people with this degree and with this formation and training it's real. There's a need for well-trained clinical psychologists who understand who the human person is and have an appreciation for how God made the human person to flourish. There's a need for that. And I think answering that need for me was a really important reason. But also knowing that just career wise, you'll have a lot of opportunities to teach to assess, to counsel. I'm sure I'm missing others to supervise. Um, there's a lot of opportunities within the field of psychology that would sustain a good career. And for me, going back to vocation, that was important for me of how do I provide for my family?
Yeah.
How do I raise this family in this world? And so having a particular latitude was exciting for me. But then also, what exactly would you be doing as a clinical psychologist? That needs to be something that's attractive to someone as well. Like if you can you see yourself assessing, doing assessments and carrying out these personality measures and writing up reports and sitting with people in their brokenness and with the various stressors that they have going on in their life and being empathic and being willing to listen and being present in that way to people. Uh, I think those are some important things to think about. If you can visualize and see like what sort of things could I do as a psychologist, and are those attractive to me? Do those feel like they're fulfilling something within me that I was made for? I think those are good reasons to pursue the degree.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Okay. Now, clearly there's a great deal of overlap between counseling and psychology. Because for a lot of people, it can be not always obvious the difference, right? I mean, because it seems like they do a lot of the same things, talk therapy, conducting psychotherapy, these kinds of things. For people out there that are maybe listening, and are maybe on the fence between the two, going the counseling route or going the PsyD route, what advice might you offer such a person?
Hmm. This is a good question. It's a question I asked myself too, because I had kind of come back and forth between a master's in counseling or a doctorate in clinical psychology. There's also doctorates in counseling psychology. There's PhD programs. This is a PsyD program. So these are a lot of important questions to kind of ask yourself, like, what do all those things mean? I know some people answer and say, well, a lot of what a counseling psychologist and a clinical psychologist do in practice are actually quite similar. And I think there's truth to that. There's definitely truth to that. I think one of the emphases towards the clinical psychology doctorate is the diagnosis piece of being able to assess, what symptoms are going on for a person and how do these symptoms map on to some sort of diagnostic criteria. And then as the clinical psychologist, being able to figure out what's going on for the person and diagnosing in that regard so as to help them work through that or embrace it in their life. So I think that to me is a major difference of the clinical psychology piece of um, using the formation for the sake of the diagnostic picture of the person before you, which isn't necessarily a component of counseling. But there is definitely overlap in the carrying out of therapeutic techniques to work towards treatment goals that I think are a piece of both clinical psychology as well as counseling.
Okay. Um, so, to your mind, I mean, what have been maybe two or three of the most formative ideas that you've learned so far in our doctoral program that have really been impactful for you, both in terms of the way that you see the world, you see the human person, and what going forward as a soon to be psychologist and clinician, what would be most sort of like influential upon you in your professional career?
Ooh, loaded question, Bradley. Um, Two things that are coming to my mind. Um, one one has to do with the ordering that having a Catholic perspective has on truth,
Mm.
and the other one has to do with the role of empathy in therapy. So, I'll start with the latter. So, empathy, we talk a lot about empathy and what empathy is. And a lot of it has to do with, I think, helping people unlock within themselves their capacity for emotion and becoming okay with experiencing emotion and understanding the proper roles of emotion. But to get more specific at your point, I think for me, what I'm learning about empathy is it has to do with this alignment with the therapist and the client. And this alignment is sort of this emotional attunement um, where you're present to the person in their own experience. And it can be that attunement has a profound impact on the person and helping them feel known, helping them feel loved, helping them feel understood, and helping them get to a place where they can say, what do I need to do to grow, to flourish, to change? This empathy plays a really important part in aligning the therapist with the client so that they can work together towards their goals. So we've talked about that a lot, and I think for me, taking that forward is, for me, what helped bring me to the program was being present with people, and now I'm learning how empathy plays a role in that, and just how important it is for people and how to practice it. And I'll be honest, Bradley, it's not just something that happens with your client, but it's something that happens outside of your time as a PsyD student. I mean, it's something that I see impacting my marriage. How can I be more empathic with my wife and love her better and other family members as well? So there's a lot you could say about empathy, but I think for me, I'm just kind of recognizing just the importance that it is and how to practice it and how much positive influence that brings about. And then the other piece that I was talking about was a Catholic understanding and how that prioritizes truth. And I think what I'm realizing there is um, what I'm realizing there is that all truth belongs to God. And there's different modalities within the psychology realm that come at the question, the presenting problem, the distress of a person from different angles. And they can all be helpful in different situations and settings. And these truths that are brought about by these different theories and these different modalities are all good. And I think what the one thread I'm seeing throughout with the Catholic Christian meta model view of the human person is that these truths belong to God and that we shouldn't be afraid of these different modalities, but we should learn to integrate them and sort of, become a clinician that has a lot of different skills within our skill set and not just bound ourselves to this modality or this theory, but to see them all as something within God's design of the person. Now, I know you can't just say it as a blanket statement. There's, things here and there that need to be refuted within different theories. But I think just sort of generally speaking, that we shouldn't be afraid to go to those places to learn um, how they can be helpful for people, so long we have a understanding of how all truth belongs to God, and let our Catholic vision of the person inform things that are contrary to those truths within those theories. So I think those are two major pieces for me. Hopefully, I've captured them well in my bit of time trying to explain them.
Yeah, that was great. So to that latter point about truth and God, I mean, like it seems that like on the one hand, like the universality of Catholic being the Greek for universal, and also but sort of related to that is the meta model, meta, the Greek from like beyond. So the idea that the meta model is able to incorporate that the truth of God is so vast that it can incorporate all that is true in human wisdom, um, and certainly to include all of the myriad schools of psychology, psychotherapy, and things like this. So to be able to incorporate and but also to judge them. Is that fair? To kind of like to that, because surely, I mean, not every theory is as aligns with the way that the church understands the human person. Is that
Mm,
fair?
I can't think of any like specific examples just off my head, but yeah, I would say judge or maybe inform or correct
Yeah.
those theories,
Yeah.
certainly. And
Yeah.
I think some people are write dissertations. That right there, topic for dissertation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So keep that in mind if you're interested in DMU and you want a dissertation idea. If you're like, hey, how
Yeah.
does this theory and Catholicism, how do they work? That's a great dissertation idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, this is good. So we're the future DMU doctoral students will hopefully remember this conversation. um, okay, and then the other thing you mentioned, empathy. Um, and you might think I'm being persnickety when I ask this. Um, do you guys talk about or distinguish between sympathy and empathy?
Hmm. I remember sort of a brief passing of the conversation. And I don't know if I'm exactly going back to what was taught there or just how I internalized it. Um, but it seems to me that sympathy more so puts two people apart from each other, where
Mm,
like you're kind of looking at someone sort of at it from a distant sort of way almost. Um, Whereas empathy is more so a coming alongside another person.
mm,
And I think that difference is actually really important. Like
mm,
if someone feels that you can sort of relate to them and but they're kind of keeping their distance from you, it's a different there's a difference there than if someone who's coming alongside you and almost experiencing with you.
yeah.
There's so much more of a deep understanding that's being shared with
Yeah,
that
yeah.
distinction.
I think so it sounds like what's going on here is like, on the one hand, you can have a situation where you might understand like what the other person is saying, right? And sort of have a cognitive like a grasp of what that is. But you're not necessarily agreeing with, right, what's going on, versus like in another situation, it's not just that you see what the other person's experiencing and you understand it, intellectually, but you're kind of on their side, you're accompanying them, you're their advocates. And like when we think of compassion, that seems almost like compassion in a way. It's like you are to suffer with compassio, to suffer with that person, to kind of like take on that person's burden, to accompany them, and to sort of lead them to flourishing. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that sounds like there's something definitely going on there. um okay. Let's see, what haven't we talked about here? Yeah, so the last question I had, was simply to revisit your own experience of being a married person and raising a family here at Divine Mercy. Is there anything else that maybe you wanted to add to that you haven't yet, that might be helpful for a lot of people that are contemplating coming here? Maybe they're about to become married, they are married, they maybe want to have children in the near future, but they also want to get their doctorate. What might you say to that lot of people?
I would say, uh, God bless you for considering this vocation along with your other vocation. And in many ways, I've found my vocation of being a husband and father prioritizing my role as a psychologist, my role as an aspiring psychologist, I should say. Um, and I also find myself to be at a major advantage having a wonderful wife
Hmm.
who is here to support me. Um, and I'm here to support her, and having a wonderful daughter to spend time with. And I think I'm really grateful that I'm not putting life on pause.
Yeah.
So it's life with my wife and with my daughter continue, and life as a PsyD student continues. And it is really challenging, but it's also life giving. Um, And I think one thing my wife and I have really learned or learning is how to rely more heavily on one another, how to how to pray more authentically as a family, um, how to I think just entrust what we're doing and who we are to the Lord in this process. And I think, you know, you know, cling to one another has been something that's really come back to us. And I think we'll look back on this time and we'll say, wow, that was challenging, but that was also really good for us. That was really good for our marriage, and that was really good for our relationships with our children. Yeah, I would say it's definitely a process of discernment, and there's a lot of factors that come into it. I mean, there's a lot of practicals just in being a husband uh, and trying to figure out, how we're going to make sure that, the budget works both in the short term and the long term. So there's a lot that comes into play with it, but I think for people to know that it's been done and it's being done and it's doable, and you really lean into the sacrament of marriage and cling to one another, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing for one another, and hopefully for those that I'll encounter through my work as a psychologist, God willing.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like an adventure, right? And one that you'll look back, like you were saying, maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now, and you'll remember it hopefully fondly. It's like, look at what we did, look at what we accomplished together.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Okay. Very good. Let's take a look at the chat box. Let's see if there's anything that people have asked, so we can attend to that real quickly. Someone's asking about how do I do classes online? How long is this session? Okay, so yeah, this is not an online program. This is an in-person one. And I'm actually going to talk more about that here in a minute when I get into the slideshow. So with that, then let me upload the slideshow and we can get into it. So bear with me. All right. So, folks, as I go through this, I'm going to ask Chris to collaborate a little bit with me. As I go through, I'll be asking him questions periodically and just asking him to chime in, given his own experience here at Divine Mercy. So without further ado, the overview of our doctoral program. So Divine Mercy University is a Catholic graduate school of psychology. It was founded in 1999 as the Institute of the Psychological Sciences, dedicated to the scientific study of psychology with a Catholic Christian understanding of the person through teaching and learning both knowledge and critical skills. Its expansion from IPS to DMU expanded in 2016 to facilitate growth and add a counseling program at the graduate level. So what this means is we transferred the name from Institute of the Psychological Sciences to Divine Mercy back in 2016 to facilitate our own kind of expansion. So we have one major university with two distinct schools, a School of Counseling, which offers a master's in counseling, which is chiefly an online program, and then the Institute of the Psychological Sciences has our residential doctorate, which is what we're talking about today. And again, this is not an online, this is an in-person, on-site, on-campus program. And then the Master of Science in Psychology is kind of the opposite in the sense it's entirely online and not at all in person. Okay, our mission, providing students with an effective academic and educational environment that supports the integration of the psychological sciences and a Catholic Christian understanding of the person. Also, we assist students intellectually and professionally as they prepare themselves to respond to the vocation as mental health professionals. So this word that continues to arise in our conversation with Chris, the sense of vocation to become a healer in science and in faith, is that's what we do here. Now, also as Chris adverted to earlier, the DC area is truly a wonderful place to be. I mean, location could hardly be better. We're just outside of the nation capital, so there's lots of, if you enjoy city life, that's certainly an offer to the east. Cultural, artistic opportunities abound. But if you're more of the outdoorsy type and you enjoy camping, canoeing, whatever it may be, water rafting, vineyards, so that's also on offer. So it's really hard to do better in terms of location and accommodating different people. All right. So we have a series of institutional accreditations. So we're institutionally accredited by SACS, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, which is recognized as an accreditation agency by the Department of Education. Divine Mercy voluntarily participated in this accreditation process, meeting or exceeding all standards and thorough evaluation. Also, we're approved to operate by SCHEV, State Council of Higher Education in Virginia. The PsyD program has been recognized since 2006 as a National Registered Designation Program by the Association of State and Professional Psychology Boards. And probably most notably of all is that we've been APA accredited, that is accredited by the American Psychological Association, and that since 2016. And DMU has been approved to participate in the National Council for State Authorization of Reciprocity Agreements. So as you can see, we have basically total and utter accreditation at every level. Okay, so here again, like Chris was mentioning, distinguishing between counseling and other mental health professions in psychology, the main difference being the scope of practice, the ability to test, and things of the nature that are quite particular to clinical psychology, in the sense that a lot of our curriculum centers around and helps to cultivate testing skills for our students. It is a 5-year program, so that means it's 122 credit hours. It includes a Master of Psychology in passing en route to the doctorate. So after successful completion of the first 2 years of study, you'll receive a Master of Psychology degree. Note, though, that if you decide to withdraw from the program after the master's, that does not prepare you to be a clinician. Okay, this is a master's that's designed to be in passing en route to a doctorate. So it doesn't mean that you can then practice as a psychologist or as a counselor. So bear that in mind. In terms of the curriculum itself, though, you'll see that it is mostly front loaded in terms of its coursework. It's a very course heavy in the first 2 years. It is also a year-long program, you'll have things going on in all parts of the year. So you'll have a fall semester, a spring semester, and a summer term. You can also see that there's a comprehensive examination for the PsyD at the end of the 3rd year. And Chris had mentioned, he's kind of on the cusp of finishing his proposal, and that's typically done in the 2nd year. Is that accurate, Chris?
Yeah, I think by the end of December of the 2nd year, you have your chair named. And then I think it's actually by the 3rd year, spring maybe, that you would have your proposal done, with hopes then that you would have your dissertation written and adequately defended before the internship year, year 5.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for laying that out, right? So chair named in the 2nd year, proposal in the 3rd, and then hopefully you defend by the end of the 5th. Did I get that right?
By the end of the 4th, before going on internship.
Oh,
That's
wow.
sort of the
Okay.
that's
Okay.
that's I think that's the fast tracked ideal that we're pushing for, hoping for.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's helpful. Okay. What other things should we know? Okay, so yeah, so here again, notice how the coursework diminishes as you move through it. The expectation, of course, being that it becomes more clinical in nature, and so you're going to be seeing more people in your 3rd and 4th year, and of course in your 5th year, it's an entirely clinically based kind of situation. What else to say? Oh yes, okay. In terms of internship, we, since becoming APA accredited in 2016, our placement has gotten better every year. So to give you some perspective, back in 2017-18, we had 85% of our students getting into APA accredited sites. But now here we are in 23, we have had 100% placements in APA sites for a couple of years now already. So I think that speaks volumes to the quality of the training that people receive here at Divine Mercy, and the really kind of the stellar caliber of our faculty in general, and the students as well, of course. Chris, is there anything I'm missing that might be helpful for people? Maybe things that you wish you would have known that you didn't, regarding the curriculum and these kinds of things?
I think you did a good job, Bradley. One thing I might add is, as you talked about front loading academic work and then ending with heavier clinical work. So I'm currently in my 2nd year, so I'm in my first practicum placement, and for all students, that's at the IPS Center, which is here on campus, which is a fantastic benefit to students that we have a clinic right here on campus where we see clients from the community who come in. Now in that year 2, you'll see maybe, I think, 1 to 3 clients, I think is what we had, sort of what the benchmark is. And then as you progress, year 3, you'd begin an externship site that's off campus somewhere within the Northern Virginia, DC area. Same thing with year 4. And then the APA accredited pre-doctoral internship is what Bradley was referring to for that 5th year. So the front loading of classes with the heavier clinical work towards the end, they kind of switch as they go, in the sense of you don't have a lot of clinical work at all in that year 1, and then that ramps up as academic work sort of ramps down, so long that you're on track with your dissertation.
Major caveat there.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight, though, that having the IPS clinic on campus is such a gift for those who attend DMU. It's right here on campus, and the staff who staff it are fantastic people as well. So it's attached to DMU, and I've enjoyed my time there thus far. So just wanted to add that, I think.
Yeah, excellent. Now, Chris, could you say a word about dissertation expectations and maybe how dissertations differ?
Well, thankfully, there is a dissertation handbook that all students read and have in their back pocket for questions. So there's sort of a general timeline that's provided for it. And thankfully, for those of us, for most of us actually, we can incorporate into some of our dissertation seminar classes, and then stats classes thereafter, some of our work in writing the dissertation, which is something I've been really grateful for, as I mentioned, having a family and just being limited in my own capacity to do everything. But I think there's a wide range of dissertation topics that are taken and that are done. Typically, I think that the process is that year before you even start here, but also year 1, and definitely year 2, you're thinking about what are ideas that I could run with for a dissertation, and then you work with different faculty. You go sit down with different faculty and see what their interests are, and how that aligns with your dissertation idea. Now, one of our classes that we had in the first year, as you'll see here, academic year 1 summer dissertation 1, it's in the top right of the curriculum. Actually, maybe no, it wasn't that. My apologies. It was the spring, so in the middle column. We had faculty come in and visit with our classes and talk about, as a faculty member, here's some of my research topics, here's some of the dissertations that I've chaired. And then we have the opportunity to ask questions and then think of ideas, brainstorm. And so it's really actually a collaborative process of working with faculty and their interests, working within your interests, and then you put together a committee of the chair, a first reader who's also a DMU faculty member, and then a third reader who essentially help guide you in your dissertation work. And there's a whole library here of finished dissertations that have just a plethora of ideas that have been done already. From I think some of the topics that people are looking at now is like flourishing in marriages, to theoretical orientation things that I talked about previously, kind of mapping on theory and the Catholic view, virtues. There's a lot of different opportunities there. I know that I'm not doing justice, I think, to the whole endeavor of dissertation work, but that's a bit of a snapshot.
Yeah. Oh, that's super helpful though. I mean, that's, it builds on a lot of, what people might be thinking in terms of expectations for how it proceeds. So thanks for that, Chris.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to a couple questions of discernment. Do you want to help people flourish? Are you interested in the science behind human behavior? Do you want to become an instrument of healing through the psychological sciences? Are you interested in performing psychological tests and assessments to diagnose your clients and create a treatment plan? Are you looking to start a career as a licensed mental health professional, specifically as a clinical psychologist? And do you have the ability and desire to work with all types of clients, from acute care to more challenging and long-term client cases? So if you're hearing this and you're thinking yes to all these questions, then you probably come to the right place. Now, in terms of major areas of competency in our program, there are foundations in psych science and research, integrity and practice, assessment and diagnosis, therapeutic intervention, professional roles, and then clinical practice from a Catholic and integrative perspective. Let me just say a word briefly about all of these here. So first is foundations in psych science and research. Graduates will attain foundational psychological science knowledge of biological, cognitive, affective, social, and developmental aspects of the human person, as well as history and systems of psychology, psychological measurement, research design, and statistical method. Graduates will have the skills necessary to conduct their own psychological research. 2, integrity and practice. Graduates be knowledgeable in areas of diversity and ethics, display critical thinking, self-aware and reflective practice, and self-care. Graduates will demonstrate responsiveness to supervision, collegiality, and professional comportment in professional practice. 3, assessment and diagnosis. Graduates will be able to conduct clinical interviewing, perform intake evaluation, demonstrate knowledge in the administration, scoring, and interpretation of psychological assessment, integrate multiple sources of test data, and clinical interview information into written reports, diagnose, and develop a treatment plan. 4, therapeutic intervention. Graduates will be able to demonstrate case conceptualization, treatment planning, building, maintaining therapeutic relationship, psychotherapy skills, crisis management of urgent and special circumstances, and discharge planning. 5, professionals. Graduates will be able to function in a variety of required roles for professional psychologists, to include consultant, educator, supervisor, practice manager, and program evaluator. They'll be able to work collaboratively within Aspire teams and with clients. And then 6, clinical practice from a Catholic integrative perspective. Graduates will develop a Catholic understanding of human flourishing in the individual person, marriage, and family life, and be able to integrate this with psychological sciences and clinical practice. Okay, so of course, clinical psychology is a very diverse field. There's so many different subspecialties within it. So the main task of this program is to get you licensed, right? So hopefully before long, Chris will be Dr. Chris Kraft, LCP, licensed clinical psychologist, right? And it definitely does avail to our doctoral graduates a whole variety of work settings. So these are a few among them: psychiatric hospitals, military establishments, private practice, of course, very popular, outpatient clinics, diocesan consultation. And this is the one, of course, Chris mentioned explicitly, right? So the ability to conduct assessment for people that are applying to seminary and they want to be people want to make sure they're fitted for priestly ministry. Personality assessments, among other things, are important and requisite. And then, being on staff in a clinical facility as well. So these, among many other things, are common workplaces for our DME grads. Now, we've had really legions of students come through our doctoral program and flourish here and move on to a lot of success thereafter. These are just a few of many testimonials that speak to our program. So these are all doctoral graduates here. James Walbridge has said, in our clinical psychology program, the training is focused on healing the human person, the whole person. Kristen Long, I was drawn to the PsyD program out of desire to serve others in a more profound way than my previous positions offered. Timothy White, the school is not afraid to teach you what it means to be human at every level, psychologically, philosophically, theologically. That's why I like it. And then Kirsten Curtis, I'm so thankful for DMU. The faculty members are very supportive and I've received lots of hands-on and clinical experience. Okay, I'm afraid this slide is not working. Okay, here we go. So this is a video testimonial from a recently graduated alumna.
I would say that being a student at Divine Mercy University, or DMU, is one of the best things that happens to me. I really appreciate the great support from faculty members and also classmates. I have gained a great deal of knowledge in all aspects of clinical practice, research, and also professional development. DMU not only provides students with strong academic skills, but also prepares them for a career in psychology. I personally benefit from mentorship with academic advisor and clinical supervisors. As a person, what I most appreciate from DMU is that its mission helped broaden my perspectives in understanding a human person through the lens of Catholicism. Catholic principles, especially in hope, love, and faith, are very valuable and certainly helped me become a better clinician.
Okay. Now, we offer a generalist program in psychology here at DMU. So we have faculty members with expertise that span the entire field of psychology. These are a few of many. Dr. Lisa Coloki is our IPS dean. She's a specialist in assessment and therapy. Dr. Graves is our assistant program director. She's a specialist in child and developmental psychology. Dr. Oriana is our director of clinical training. And these three gentlemen were among the founding faculty members of our school back in its genesis in the late 90s. So this is Dr. Scarfani. He's a specialist in CBT and group therapy. Dr. Nordling, a specialist in child, marriage, and family. And Dr. Vitz's work is really centered around the nexus between theology and modern psychology. Dr. Vitz happens to be a massive intellectual hero of my own. His whole story, I love telling it. He was actually once an atheist, believe it or not, when he was a young man. In fact, he was an atheist until his late 30s, and he converted to Catholicism while he was a professor of psychology at New York University. And his wife too kind of went through a very similar journey. She was an atheist professor and she became Catholic. Anyway, what came to the forefront of his own mind while this was happening in his own interior life was he wanted to understand how do we really reconcile these two disciplines of theology and psychology when they seem, at least superficially, to be sort of set against one another, at least in the way that is presented in a lot of the secular academy. Anyway, Vitz wrote this, what to my mind is very much of a seminal work called The Psychology of Religion. And this came out, I think, in 1977, where he kind of takes a look at the trajectory of humanistic psychology over the course of the 20th century. He really offers a rather sobering critique. He looks at a lot of the main players, such as Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, people like this, and especially he takes on the principle of self-actualization, and he really kind of takes this to task and shows that really when psychology becomes unmoored from theology, the task of psychology becomes somewhat rudderless. And this is what I think Chris had adverted to earlier in our conversation when he was talking about, to really have have psychology be fleshed out by the broader perspective of philosophy and theology. It kind of gives it a really much stronger ordering principle and helps to bring people to flourishing. But Vitz's work, went on, from that, and he moved into other areas of research on Freud. He got into that into the 80s. He has a book on Freud. And then around the time of our school's founding, he wrote a book called Faith of the Fatherless. And this is one of my favorites. I mean, he basically, the argument there is that the way that people understand God is very much mediated through human fatherhood. And so because God is a father, at least by analogy, in the way that we understand him, Vitz argues that a lot of the major players in modern philosophy, especially the atheistic philosophers, he shows that if you look at their own sort of family dynamics, and especially their own fathers, it was often there were often very fraught relationships there, and the fathers were often either abusive or absent, or in some cases where he talks about Nietzsche's father died when he was a very young boy. At any rate, so what he argues is that a lot of the what passes for the intellectual project of atheism is actually more often this kind of psychological consequence of the way that people have come to see God, again, mediated through the human father. And in some ways, this is a fascinating kind of inversion of the Freudian projection theory of God, right? So that God is kind of like this projection of our own subconscious need for a father. But Vitz argues that more often the case is that we understand God through our own fathers, and many times this can be a very warped example. So anyway, all I'd say, Dr. Vitz's work is very foundational for our own beginning Divine Mercy and its foundation, and then this sort of from his own conversion story and his own intellectual project, the university kind of came to be. So but sadly, though, Dr. Vitz has recently retired, so he's not officially a professor here, but he's an emeritus, and he sort of comes to campus here and there, so it's always good to see him. All right. Now to get a little bit more practical here, now in terms of licensing, of course, licensing would be required for anyone wanting to practice as a psychologist. The main point here being that this is something that you would need to sort of seek out, certainly. But on the other hand, we have lots of resources here for students that want to find information related to how they can become licensed in whatever state they choose to practice. And so much like if you were to go to medical school or law school, getting the doctoral degree does not immediately confer the ability to practice as an attorney or a physician, but same thing as a psychologist. Once you finish your doctorate, there's usually a 9 to 12 month period of supervision. And then after that period of supervision is over, you generally take your licensure exams. And then at that point, you, God willing, are a full-fledged licensed clinical psychologist, and you're free to practice on your own. These two graphs to depict a distinction I like to draw between simply buying something, especially a good example of being a car, right? Because I mean, cars are notorious for losing their value after you buy them, whereas this is quite the opposite. Especially like Chris had mentioned, the demand for mental health professionals is quite real. The modern world is very much beset by a lot of mental health problems. People find themselves very much, in many cases, alone, anxious, depressed, addicted, among other things. And so there's a serious need for people to take up their vocations as healers in faith and in science. And so this becomes from a financial ROI business perspective, it's like looking at from supply and demand situation. There's a great demand for clinical psychologists and therapists, but also if you consider the supply, right? I mean, there aren't as many doctoral level clinicians as there are masters. It is a more rigorous and more intense program. You get a deeper understanding of the human person through more extensive research. Also, the ability to test and have a certain scope of practice that really goes beyond master's level training means that you're going to be the supply will be diminished. And so, of course, we now have a great amount of demand and not that much supply. While, of course, what Chris said earlier is true that one probably shouldn't just go in for this just to make money. Still, you can do very well as a psychologist, provided that you play your cards right, as it were. So that's something to consider. In terms of the investment itself, 1,170 per credits, 122 credits over 5 years is 142,740. Most of our students do use federal aid to help pay for it. The FAFSA, note that the FAFSA becomes available December 1st. So you still have a little bit of time to before that becomes available, and then to take action on that. We do, although, offer a number of ways of defraying costs for students. So for one thing, we offer work study, which is certainly available on campus. In the earlier stages of a person's time as a doctoral student, they're usually able to do basic jobs in, say, the admissions or business office with me and my colleagues. And then as they go through the program, say in third and fourth year, they often take on more substantial jobs, say as an RA or a TA, and there they get to use their psychology training to help their fellow students. So there's that. If you happen to be Catholic and can demonstrate that you're one in good standing and you're active within a parish, then there's a discount relevant here. So I think that's between 10 and 15% off of tuition, which is super helpful. Also, we offer a slew of scholarships to which you would be able to apply. Now, you can apply to up to 4 of them maximally and receive 2 of them. And they pay out up to the amount here indicated to the right, depending on the scholarship. And these scholarships sort of relate to different demographics. So I would certainly encourage you to take a look at all of them on our website, divinemercy.edu/financial aid. The last thing to say, though, is that we do offer merit scholarships based on, merit. So this is not something that you specifically would apply to, like these other scholarships. Rather, the way this works is that candidates are evaluated per interview and ranked. And so in the top, depending on the admission cycle, depending on top 5 to 6 candidates will receive merit scholarships, and the highest being half off of tuition is our top scholarship, and then they range down to a quarter of tuition. So that's clearly substantial. Now, entrance requirements, we do require at least a baccalaureate degree from an accredited institution. We do prefer that you study psychology, though that's not strictly necessary. We've had students come to us from all backgrounds, from hard sciences to humanities and arts and everything in between. But if you don't have any formal psychology training, we will typically ask you to complete a prerequisite course, which is an online one done normally over the first year. Course the first year, it's pretty straightforward. It's really a undergraduate course in psychology spread out over 2 semesters, so it's usually not that difficult for people. And also, we typically want a GPA that's at least a 3.0. If you're not quite there, let's say you're on cusp of that, maybe you have a 2, 7, 8, 9, something in that vicinity, please talk to me, email me, schedule time in my Calendly page, and we can talk about it. It might not be necessarily prohibitive, so reach out to me and we can talk about it. Now, in terms of application and how this works, the first thing to do is, provided this is making a lot of sense to you, is to apply online. And once the online application is submitted, our financial aid office will reach out to you. And then once the other elements of the application, so I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but the other things include things like essays, recommendations, transcripts, the GRE, all those other things. Once we have them assembled, then I will submit your application to the dean for her review, and provided that she approves your candidacy, you get an invitation to an interview. As you can see, we have 3 different interviews per admission cycle. And these are all in-person, on-campus, on-site interviews. Okay, so they're all-day affairs. The one that's most impending here is November 10th, so a little over a month from now, but not too far away. This is probably our most popular interview for the simple reason that we offer a $3,000 tuition remission in the first year for students who are admitted in this interview. So slots are rapidly being taken up. I think at this point we only have 8 left. So if you want to take advantage of this special offer, please get in touch with me, and I can help you hopefully get everything in time. If, say, that it doesn't work out, we can move you to the next interview, which is on January 26th. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay, so let's really briefly, I'd like to recap the procedure, because in terms of application, because this is often misunderstood. Okay, so here again, the first step is the online application, and that's distinct from and separate from everything else. So you might think of this as like a 2-step, or at least a 2-tiered process. Okay, so first thing on the online application is submitted. This is mostly data entry. It will ask you about where you're from, your address, your phone number, your email, where you went to school. It will also ask you for recommenders. So you'll need to provide them names, emails, and phone numbers of people who you think would be ideal to recommend you as a budding doctoral student. But notice, though, that when you put in your recommenders, you do not need to reach out to them and ask them necessarily for permission, because you're going to do that once the application is submitted yourself. Okay, so once the application is submitted, then you reach out to your recommenders and say, hey, I'm whomever you are, and I am applying to Divine Mercy's doctoral program. And then, God forbid, one or more of them says no, it's no problem at all. You can reach out to somebody else. Okay, so briefly to review, online application first, then you seek out recommendations from people. And then included the other things we need to receive are essays. So and there's 2 essays. One will ask why you want to be a clinical psychologist and why you want to study at Divine Mercy, and then the second one will ask you about your academic and clinical interests. We talked about how that played out in Chris's own application and his own sort of journey in psychology thus far. We'll also need your resume and obviously your transcripts, and then the GRE. I do want to say one word though about this GRE. Okay, a couple of so first is that the GRE, while it is required. There is no, okay, so like there's no waiver for the GRE. Okay. We require every student to do it. So while that's a requirement, the GRE is simply not the most important element of the application. So we're, as you can see, we're looking at multiple different dimensions of each candidate, and we truly do look at everybody and as a multi-dimensional kind of candidate. We're not just looking at grades and GRE scores, especially in a field like clinical psychology, where we need to have a good sense of you as a person, and your promise to be a good clinician. So that to say, the GRE, while it's a consideration, it's simply not the most important part of it. So it's much better to get the GRE done promptly than to get it done perfectly. So keep that in consideration. If you are an international student, let's say you hold a degree from outside the United States, we will need that to be evaluated, because a lot of foreign countries have a grading system which is different from American GPAs. So in that case, you'll need to have yours submitted to a website like wes.org so that they can evaluate and transcribe the application into American GPA so we can understand what it means. Of course, this degree will have to be the equivalent of an American bachelor's degree. If it's not in English, we would need that to be translated into English. This, of course, is your own responsibility for the cost. And finally, if English is not your primary language, and by that I mean, if English is not the language that you're used to conversing in on a daily basis in your personal and professional life, you're going to have to get an English test done, either by the TOEFL or by an IELTS academic test, okay? And the TOEFL requirement, I mean, we need at least 100 out of 120. So, but what this, let me tell you what this doesn't mean. So there's often confusion about the difference between being a native English speaker and whether or not English is your primary language. So let's say that your your first and native language was Spanish, say. But your English is excellent. You use English conversationally in your personal and professional life. It's what you're used to on a daily basis. That means that English, we would regard that as your primary language, in which case you would not need to take the TOEFL or the IELTS. Okay, so if that's you, bear that in mind. If English here again, if that's what you use most of the time in most of your life, then you don't need to take the TOEFL. So I hope that's clarifying. Okay, that is that. Let's take a look at the Q&A in the chat. We talked about that one. What do we have here? Okay. What are the major, this is John Burton. What is the major differences between PsyD and PhD? All right, Chris, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, to my understanding, the difference between PsyD and PhD is that PsyD, I think, stands for practitioner scholar. It's a practitioner scholar model. And it's, I don't need to get into the weeds, I think, of how PhD came first and then PsyD came later. You can find some of that online. But to my understanding, what makes DMU a PsyD program and how it's different than PhD is that it has an emphasis on both becoming a clinician as well as doing scholarly work. So that's where you have the ramping towards clinical work with our externships and the predoctoral internship is the clinician side. And then the academic side would be, of course, all of our classes as well as our dissertation. I think PhD has more to do with the research emphasis. I could be wrong to some degree there, depending on the program. But that's how I've understood it. Bradley, I don't know if you want to add more to it.
Yeah, no, I think you basically got it right. I mean, yeah, so PhD does predate the PsyD in terms of, like what came first, but like Chris was saying, the emphasis between practitioner scholar and scholar practitioner, or sometimes the verbiage is scientist practitioner or practitioner scientist, whatever, however you want to phrase that. The idea is that the PhD has a premium and emphasis on research, and the PsyD on clinical application. Now, that does not mean, though, that say that you like them both, and you say, "Oh my gosh, like if I go to Divine Mercy, that means I'm always going to be a clinician." That's not necessarily true. So, I mean, certainly, if you came to us and you discovered that you really loved research and you wanted to be a university professor, if you wanted to publish and write books and what have you, that's totally wonderful. And some of our students do, in fact, go down that route. We in fact have a director of research training, Dr. Rebecca Morse, and she's does a fantastic job of getting students that are interested in research and academia into postdoctoral programs in whatever field that they want to practice in. Like a classic example would be something like neuropsychology, or a field that has a lot of emphasis on research and even more extensive training beyond the PsyD program. So if that is attractive to you, but you also like you think you want to be a clinician, you can't go wrong with our own doctoral program. Though if you were the type that knows that you don't want to do clinical work at all, the PsyD probably is not the best option, because, as Chris could probably tell you, I mean, it's a big part of our own curriculum, and in fact most of our graduates become clinicians. So I hope that gives you a good kind of synopsis of the two. Okay, let's see. All right, if you already have your master's degree, how long is the PsyD program? Great question, John. So this is kind of, I hope to get, this is sort of bad news, I guess, as it were. If you have a master's, it will not truncate the time spent in the program. It's going to be 5 years probably regardless. Okay. But the good news is that you will have your transcript submitted, and you might have maximally 18 credits transferred. So you might have a lighter load in certain semesters here and there, especially if these courses are good sort of fits with our own coursework, and so the dean can say, so he's taken developmental psych and we have developmental psych and he doesn't have to take that course, something like that. It can make the program lighter, but it's not going to say, let's say you have a master's in psychology, it's not going to mean that this is all of a sudden a 3-year program and you sort of start in year 3 or whatever, or year 4. It doesn't work that way, okay? So bear that in mind. And for that reason, I also do not, sometimes people ask me, do you recommend that I get a master's first to prepare myself for the PsyD? And I say absolutely not. And partly for that reason, right? Because in some sense, you're spending more time and more money prior to starting a doctoral program like our own. So that's that. Okay. John Schwartz, the cost of living is very high in your area. Are the internships and externships paying jobs? All right, Chris, do you want to speak to that one?
Sure. So I am not positive regarding the externships. So as I was mentioning earlier, first year is all academic. Second year begins in the IPS Center for our first practicum or externship. That's not paid. It's about 10 to 15 hours a week. And then year 3 is our first externship. Year 4, there's another externship locally. I think some of those are paid, but I think the majority of them are not paid. That's my, at least, anticipation. I'm personally not expecting to be paid for my externship, but I would be pleasantly surprised if I am. And then the 5th year, the predoctoral internship, my understanding is that those are paid. That's a full year internship at a site sort of anywhere in the country that we are matched on. So the payment for those, though, I'm not sure what the range is. I think probably somewhere around $30,000 a year. I'm not sure on that regard, but I think that's kind of what my wife and I are budgeting for, what our future is going to look like during that year.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And to piggyback on that, that's now the one thing I would add though is that in the fifth year, so you might think of the fifth year as analogous to like a medical school residency, right? So you are going to make money. But there are some internships that are going to pay much more than others. So for example, if you got into a military internship, that's going to pay much, much more than most of the other ones. In some cases, two or threefold. And so just kind of to bear that in mind, if that's, crucial for you, then you might want to try to get into something that is related to the military, doing PTSD, say. But yeah, I mean, the externships are typically, like Chris said, not what you shouldn't expect to make money from that. Also, do most students work? Chris, what do you think about that?
Some do. It's challenging if you do, but some do. I do. It's limited, given it's a full-time PsyD program. Especially I think as clinical work picks up, the ability to work will lessen. But it's, I think, to my understanding, it's a bit of a case by case basis that you work out with your academic advisor and the dean. So I think each person has their own unique situations that you have to kind of iron out what that's going to look like. I think many of us do work in some capacity. I know a number of us do different assistantships at the university, and those things can be really helpful for that piece. I don't know if you want to add more to that, Bradley.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got it mostly. I would only add that it's not reasonable to think that you would hold down a full-time job and do the program, right? I mean, like, especially a full-time job that's like during the day. And because I mean, you might think of this as a daytime kind of gig, right? Monday through Friday, weekends off kind of thing. But this, St. John, Schwartz, your LPC, I mean, so provided that you're able to see people outside of courses and things like that, that's certainly on the table. But yeah, like Chris said, it's a balancing act, being able to hold down the reading load, but and also work duties, but it can be done, right? Well, as Chris is managing so far. Okay. All right. Can your guest speak to the work-school balance to help give richer texture, what that might look like in the first 2 years in particular?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So, first 2 years in particular. So, what we've done, so we have classes in the fall, the spring, and the summer. And there's a bit of the break over Christmas, a bit of the break in the summer, not very long. I don't think either are more than 4 weeks. And we'll have classes about 4 days a week. And so what we've had so far is, for those first 2 years, one day off a week from classes that you're working on various things that are due. What we've done, I can speak from my own personal experience with my own family, is, like I said, my wife works full time as a physical therapist, and 2 days of the week she's working 12 hours a week. The other 3 days of the week she's done at 1. And so what we've done is balanced sort of our my schedule of class time and her time in the clinic to minimize the amount of time that we have her at a local daycare. That's something that's important for us, to try to have her home as much as possible. Now this daycare, I gotta say, man, it's highly reputable. There's like 3 or 4 other DMU families that have either been there or are there currently. So we're taking it over. Anyways, so what it's looked like for us is when I'm in class and when Elise is working, Greta will be at daycare, and then we try to have Elise when she's off, she's home. And then during Greta's wake window, I'll typically be awake and playing with her, maximizing as my time with her. And then when my girls go to bed, I hit the books. And a lot of times what that'll look like is maybe some later nights during the week. And then on the weekends, taking care of the rest of the things that need to be taken care of. And so, some weeks when things are heavier on the weekends, I'll have to really just sort of find that place where I can get some work done, home office, or get away to a library or something like that. And weeks that things are a little bit lighter, I'm spending time with family. I'm trying to spend time with family as much as possible. So that's kind of part of that's part of the balance, is kind of recognizing, okay, how can I be organized with my schedule to know when are classes, when are things due, when is my wife working, when do we need to have Greta with someone to be cared for, and then just keeping up with it all, making sure that things are getting read and turned in timely, and then maximizing on time with my girls when I can. And I want to go back to something that you had said, Bradley, just regarding like things to do in the area. You drive 3 hours east and you're in the ocean. You drive 3 hours west, there's some mountain ranges.
Yeah.
And locally, I mean, farmers markets and other fun things to do that are around town, parks and walking paths and things like that. So there's definitely time for leisure, but you have to kind of carve it. You have to prioritize it. You have to make it happen amidst the other tasks and responsibilities. And so that's kind of what it's looked like for both years, of four days a week of classes, 1 day a week that's off, that you're thankful for to kind of catch up with some of your other things that are due. And then with my family in particular, balancing when's my wife working, when am I working on schoolwork, what kind of care do we need for Greta, and just making it all work and keeping up with things based off of our calendar. Hopefully that kind of fleshes it out for you a little bit. I think it seemed like you were looking for what does it look like? What's the schedule like? So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. I think that's basically what was asked. John, okay, what are the approximate costs? Okay, we just mentioned that. So I mean, I assume that you got that. Let's see. Good. All right. Yeah, it sounds like you got that, John. Fantastic. And it looks like that's it. So with that, let's conclude. I want to thank you very much, Chris, for joining me and sharing your story, both prior to DMU and your time here. It's been most illuminating. I think a lot of people can really benefit from your own experience. So thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure, Bradley. Thanks for having me. And if anyone has further lingering questions just regarding, family life and doing school here, or any other questions that seem applicable that I might be able to help with, feel free to ask Bradley for my contact information so you can connect us. I'd be happy to do that. And thank you, Bradley, for all the good work that you do for this university.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I'm happy to do it. Okay, everyone. It was great to have everyone on board for this webinar. God bless, and bye-bye.